Good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. This is Nanette Kennedy with Humanities Team and the Evolution Revolution. And we are reading Neale Donald Walsch's newest book called The Essential Path. And I will have Linda let us know where we are, page-wise and chapter-wise. And we'll just get this thing going. Glad you're all here. Linda?
Okay. So this is The Essential Path. We are on chapter 4. It's called The Situation. Alienation inevitably arises in the aftermath of ongoing citizen frustration. Citizen frustration inevitably arises in the aftermath of ongoing societal dysfunction. Societal dysfunction inevitably arises in the aftermath of ongoing systemic failure. And that's exactly what we've had here. Long-term, ongoing systemic failure. We've put into place on our planet a wide assortment of systems created to make life better for all of us. Those systems are not working. There are some rare exceptions, but in the main, most are failing to produce the outcomes they were intended to produce. But wait, it's worse. They're actually producing the opposite. Our political systems, created to produce safety and security for the world's nations and their people, have in the main produced far too much of exactly the opposite. Ongoing disagreements, endless insulting and demonizing of opponents, dangerous trade wars, nerve-wracking military threats, and escalating violence between people at every level. Our economic systems, created to produce opportunity and sufficiency for all, have in the main produced far too much of exactly the opposite. Massive economic inequality and increasing poverty, with a handful of people, actually fewer than 10, holding more wealth and resources than 3.5 billion. That's half the planet's population combined. Our social systems, created to advance and facilitate the joy of living in community and build a foundation for harmony among a divergent population, have in the main produced far too much of exactly the opposite. Discordance, disparity, prejudice, and despair, with limited opportunity for upward mobility, and in far too many cases, rampant injustice, producing exasperation at every level. Our economic systems, hang on a second, exasperation, my Kindle jumped, exasperation and outrage. Even our vaulted online internet systems, created as the newest innovation of our social systems and originally designed to bring us closer together, through the marvel of social media, have in the main produced far too much of exactly the opposite. A playing of one against another through the manipulation of emotions, a heightening of our differences, an exacerbation of our fears, and a poisoning of our minds with negativity, all of which has not brought us closer together, but driven us further apart. And saddest of all, our spiritual systems, created to inspire a greater love of God and so of each other, have in the main produced far too much of exactly the opposite. Bitter righteousness, shocking intolerance, widespread anger, deep-seated hatred, self-justified violence. Now, you may think that I have exaggerated the impact of all this. Things are better here on Earth now than ever before, right? Well, I suppose that's true for some. But do you know that on this day, over 1.7 billion people will have no access to clean water? Do you know that 1.6 billion will live without electricity? Do you know that, difficult as it may be to believe, 2.5 billion people, over a quarter of the planet's population, will not have toilets to use in this, the first quarter of the 21st century? These are more than simple inconveniences. The health hazards caused by such conditions lead to thousands of unnecessary deaths each year. And speaking of unnecessary deaths, consider this statistic. More than 650 children die of starvation every hour on this planet. Every hour. Starvation? Really? While we throw away more food in restaurants from Tokyo to Paris to Los Angeles each evening than would be needed to feed the children of an entire outlying third world village for a week? Even a quick overview of such numbers, even the most dispassionate glance, surely provides dismaying evidence of our absolute, complete, and utter failure to grasp, much less articulate, the simplest and most basic answers to the simplest and most basic questions that members of any sentient species would, one would think, sooner or later have to ask. Who are we? Who do we choose to be as a species? What gives here? What's going on with the human race that it cannot see itself even as it looks at itself? Where is humanity's blind spot? What is the reason for all this? End of chapter. Discussion?
It's very sad. I feel very, very sad to hear you reading this, because it's spelling out what we all know but refuse to feel. Over.
Okay, I can say. In a way, I feel that it is very, very brave to be so outspoken, because it actually is what it is. But I'm sure that the continuous book will give some opening to a better word.
I actually, the comment before this one, if you could repeat that, I thought that was really quite profound. Really applied about feelings. The one that was the comment about. Hello?
Are you talking to me, Anne? Shabana?
Yeah. Yes, Shabana. You had made a comment about we're not willing, something about feelings, that we're not willing to feel. What was your comment?
Yes, exactly. I mean,
Well, can you say what you said again? Because I thought that was really quite good.
Thank you. I want to emphasize that as long as people in the first world don't have to worry about toilets or 650 children dying every day, it's okay. But if that happened to one of us, it would be a different story. And I know that there's also this Swedish teenager who's blaming the older generation for global warming, but she's not focusing on what Neil was told by God, that it might be a climate emergency, but it's a different story. If you're in Bangladesh and the sea has swallowed up your agricultural land and now there's nothing for you to plant. So it very physically and quickly moves from the mind to the heart when you're the one who's in trouble, when it's your child that's died. Over.
Well, this is very good, and that's to me the macrocosm of it. And the microcosm is like what I'm dealing with now that I've been faced with the last week, which is not really know how to deal with the feelings around my friend Daryl, who's in this nursing home or rehab home for his dementia. What they diagnosed him, he has dementia of the Lewy body, which is really interesting. What I'm getting at is that the place that he's at is horrible. They're neglectful, and there's so much going on. And trying to look at where to have a voice and where not to have a voice, and from the scale of, well, let's just start with getting my friend better care. But anyway, it's been really tearing me up about I have to deal with certain things like that. Now, it's one thing to, just think about all the people we just shared about that can't drink water or that are starving to death. And here's just one person that I can't even get his situation straightened out to where he just doesn't die of being hungry and thirsty. Over. I hope that made some sense anyway.
It certainly does. What you're talking about is compassion. It doesn't matter whether the person is in Bangladesh or Africa. Daryl represents the voiceless, the ones,
absolutely,
yeah, the ones who are neglected because they can't whine to authority.
Well, he can't speak. It's like it doesn't come out. So in other words, imagine not being able to tell anybody anything about your needs and having people have to figure out or guess or have enough compassion to think, well, the guy's been sitting there for 6 hours. Maybe I should go over and help him drink a glass of water. I don't know. So I think you can hear my frustration. I just really like to turn it into, I've been turning it over to God because I know there's a solution for everything. But the thing that got me about this was the macrocosm and the microcosm, if you understand that. Kind of like it begins at home, and when you get home handled, then you go to community, then you go to city, then you go to state, then you go to country, then you go, and it keeps expanding until you hit the galaxy and then beyond. Over. Oh, one more comment. How do you get yourself that big that you can start encompassing more of the whole? And that's what I admire about this group and the humanities team, is how much they're expanding to be able to encompass a much larger scale of things over.
Hey, this is Megs, Linda's guest. The thing that struck me in this chapter was when they talked about blind spots, and I think that's something that is, you know, on the human level, I mean, on the global level, but also, you know, down the way to the level of countries and states and communities and individuals. And I think one of the questions is, how do we get past our blind spots? Because I think we all have some, and the organizations or the hospital you deal with has some, and there's some at all these levels, and somehow, you know, we need to be able to get through these blind spots so that, you know, that someone here actually can, you know that a child of God just died of starvation, and know that there's a man sitting in a hospital.
I like the word that you use, blind spots. It's better than what I was thinking about, boulders. It makes more sense to see that they're blind spots because there is a connection of ideas or reality in a way. Over.
A question, Shabana. Who was the Swedish person you mentioned?
The teenager called Greta something.
Oh, Greta Thunberg. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Well, she's all over the news because what she's saying is absolutely true from the point of view of intelligent, educated, wealthy people who are able to express themselves in a way that's newsworthy. But what Anne is bringing up is something that, for Daryl, is something that my family had to experience with my father in a nursing home, and he could speak. But the short staff, all the nursing homes are short staffed. And all over the world, including China, which is the biggest country in the world, there isn't enough labor to look after old people. So all that I can think of is Greg Braden, who said exactly what Mother Teresa said, which is the smallest actions committed with the greatest love will cause the biggest change. And my understanding is that the compassion that Anne is expressing right now is changing everything because we're all one. And one person's compassion, that the 18 inches, which is the biggest distance between the mind and the heart, if that is achieved by one human being, I truly believe that the whole is also affected. Over.
Can you say that again? The smallest action?
The most loving, compassionate action committed by one person makes the difference, because even one heart is part of the whole and changes the whole. I believe that.
I agree with you, Shabana. Really. Over.
So that quote was Mother Teresa and who?
Well, Mother Teresa was the spiritual woman, but
No, I know who Mother
Greg,
Teresa is.
yeah, but Greg Braden,
Yeah, thank you.
he's a
read some of his-
scientist who actually who actually studied this at the physical level.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
Yeah, but you see, he's saying the same thing, but he's documenting what Mother Teresa said. And that's the reason.
The spiritual and the science come together, spiritual and medical.
Yes, and he isn't the only one. My daughter was studying physics, you know, I mean, as a teenager, and she sent me stuff which said the same thing. It's just that what scientists knew 10 or 15 or 20 years ago is now becoming mainstream. Over. What's Lindapedia got to say?
Well, there isn't anything out there, right? Everything that we think we see and know is an illusion. And the only thing that's ultimately real for each one of us is ourselves and our own individual experience. That's what's real for each of us. And so, you know, in this situation, conversation, I think that the real key is that we get distracted by all this stuff out here that we think we see.
Oh, yeah.
And ultimately, for each of us, the question is always, what does this mean for me? How does this impact my soul? What does this mean for my spiritual journey? Because we can get really caught up in looking out there and judging and seeing all these things that are wrong. But they're not wrong in one sense, because they are all a function of divinity. There isn't anything that isn't, even the dying children, even the people with no water. This is God's playground here. This is God's scene that's been created, and we are all actors in that scene. And I think we get very distracted when we look around out there at the world and start naming all these things that are wrong. Because I think the only way any of it gets fixed is to go within and love yourself and love all aspects of yourself, because they contain all this stuff that's out here that we're looking at.
That was a good closure, because I think what happens is that the I, or the me, the brain looks out, but it's in my divinity and my connection to whatever I call God, or the higher consciousness that's working through me. That's the only thing that's real. And then I agree that everything else is kind of how we just get sidetracked and distracted, and that's, I guess, the ego part of us is drawn to the drama. Over.
I agree, Anne.
But this does, what's interesting about this whole discussion to me is, if you've noticed, there's a time shift. It's like 40s being the new 60s being in the 40s or whatever. But if you look at when Neil started, it's like a 20-year time shift. What you said about 10 or 15 years ago, I'd say 20 years, was when all this was being discovered. but it took all this time for it to manifest through whatever we went through so that it could be accepted into the mainstream. That's why I find the field of the medical spiritual healing being so interesting, because it's what you're saying. The spiritual is now embracing the medical, and the medical was never willing to do this in any shape or form before, but it is coming to fruition. Say a prayer. Over. Sorry.
I've got another question for Lindapedia. May I ask?
Okay.
Okay. So I understand it, but when Anne is looking at Daryl needing a glass of water, and the workers are too busy looking after people who need something more urgently than Daryl's dehydration, what is the appropriate response? Because Anne cannot be there to provide him with the water whenever he needs it. And the people who are working there wouldn't be holding their jobs if they weren't compassionate.
Right.
So I'm just wondering how you answer that, Linda.
I can give you how I think it could be answered. I'll wait for Linda, sorry.
Yeah, and I'm interested in hearing what Anne has to say. My thought would be that Daryl is not the only guy needing a glass of water. So this is like a system thing that they need, that needs attention. That's, I believe, probably why it's coming to the surface and to Anne's attention, and why Daryl is being an instrument, being used basically by the universe to show the problem. So, perhaps a conversation could be made with the head nurse or the head supervisor, the shift supervisor, where, where they're checking, does everybody have a glass of water? Everybody should have a glass of water every 2 hours. I mean, that should just be a normal thing. People need to be hydrated. We're 80% water, depending on what part of our body we measure. So, and maybe it's more like 90%. So maybe it's something, that needs to be brought to attention and needs to get scheduled. That's one suggestion I would have. Dan, what do you think?
Well, what I think is, it's really a easy solution. Is they have these, what they do is they put all these people in the back room for the whole day. They have 2 aides sit in a chair and watch to make sure the people don't get up or fall down or whatever. Why don't those aides just every couple of hours walk over? Like Daryl can't say, I need water. But if they're in the room with him for 4 hours, what the place says, it's very simple. They get 3 meals a day and they get plenty of fluids with their meals. But some of them are on medication. So yes, what it is it's something that's discovered. And then we find it must be something very simple to implement. And you're right, it's not just Daryl. Most old people don't drink water. Well, I'm not saying all, but I'm just saying. So it's something that can be dealt with. And the only reason I know this is because when I get there and I see him, we go through 4 16-ounce glasses of water, cranberry juice, this, that, and the other thing. So, and I have brought it up over and over again, but I think stronger action sometimes needs to be taken. So I've gone from the nurse to the head nurse to the grievance counselor. So next week it's the director.
Right, and so maybe be armed when you meet with the director. be armed with some information about how important it is to stay hydrated. And really, you know, juice and cram, that's all fine, but really water is the best thing. And even if they just had a couple of pitchers of water that were available and cups in that big room, you know, where they have all the people, and then the aides can just, you know, pour them some glasses of water.
Well,
It's a simple solution, but it's going to require you taking it to the person to make it happen.
yeah. And simple is always the best.
Yeah.
So thank you for everybody's input, and thank you for listening to where I'm at too, because as you can tell, I'm trying to find some positive changes that could be made, simple ones that seem obvious.
I think it's an excellent example, Anne, of the kinds of difficulty that we witness in a day. You know, so here's a situation where when you go in there, it would be very easy to fall into the trap of judgment and pointing fingers and even name calling, you know, and that's all that energy that's right there waiting for us. And to be able to look at a very difficult situation where someone is not being cared for, and to put your energy and your concentration into solution solving as opposed to finger pointing is really, that's what's being called forth. Our hearts are being called forth to open and to find new ways of looking and solving problems. And I just feel like this is a great example of that.
Yeah, and awareness. It's kind of like just getting that. There are lots of sick people out there, but there's also a lot of uneducated people out there, or there are just some things that are common sense and people don't have that kind of common sense. So it's really more of putting it out in a way that it can be received, because I would assume that none of those aides that work there really have any concept about health or what's needed, or you know.
No, they're probably getting paid $10 an hour. You know, they probably, I mean, those are considered menial jobs. They're probably not treated well as employees.
Well, all that's irrelevant. All I was saying is that anytime we can raise awareness toward anything, then we're going to be making an impact on those that want that need that information and don't have it. And it's as simple as that.
Right.
You just put it out there and give it to God.
So I don't know that it's irrelevant, though, the way those employees are treated. I mean, it all comes into, it's all relevant, right? How they're treated, what training they've had, what kind of compassion they've been shown as employees. It all matters. How we treat each other matters. And that's really what it comes down to. But how we treat ourselves, how we treat each other is usually a reflection of how we treat ourselves.
And I do think that the whole income inequality thing matters in this discussion because, you know, I know that compared with all those people who don't have water and toilets, I'm incredibly wealthy just to live in this country and have those things. But when you're working, you know, and I'm lucky, I have one job and an uncle who helps me so I can afford to live where I live. But you have people who are working multiple jobs for the pathetic excuse for a minimum wage in this country. When you have like vast quantities of people who really are stuck in survival mode, you know, they don't have the luxury of worrying about the people with no water in other parts of the world because they're struggling to survive to take care of their family. And I used to think that that was like a byproduct of the system. But, you know, I guess I've gotten a little more cynical, and I really feel like those 10 people who are holding like the vast majority of the world's resources kind of prefer it if you have a huge, you know, class of people who are so focused on survival that they can't make any waves about the injustice of the system that's so prevalent throughout the world over.
I am reminded of, you know, after you've spoken, Mary, I'm reminded of what Neil said in a previous book, which is whatever you want, give that away. And every one of us here who's engaged in this discussion agrees with the fact that even though everything is illusion, and even though we're required to be compassionate and loving towards ourselves, there is the beginning of the discussion by Anne, which was, I give Daryl 4 16-ounces glasses of fluid when I visit Daryl. Now, this is compassion in action. If the way Anne is behaving towards Daryl right in the moment is to treat him as though Daryl were Anne. She sees him, she hydrates him. And it's made no difference for Anne to speak to everyone from the lowest level up. But now she's headed to see the director of the facility. However, giving Daryl the fluid to hydrate him is love in action. And I would request that in our meditation, we as a group join our hearts in wishing not just Daryl, but absolutely every human being of whatever age and in whatever circumstance, that we wish them more of what they need. I think that at the micro level, as Anne spoke, this is the building block. Over.
I agree with everything that's been said here. And I know it can be frustrating in those kind of circumstances, and I know in the deepest part of me that being frustrated without some sort of action and some sort of trust in the universe, we can drive ourselves crazy. But we can all do what we can do. And going back to the quote by Mother Teresa, with the greatest love, and that's all I have to say. Over.
Well, should we try the next chapter? It's not very long.
I say yes.
Okay. Okay, this is chapter 5. The reason. Sooner or later, every thinking person comes around again to this question. Is it possible, just possible, that there is something we don't fully understand about ourselves, about life, and yes, about God, the understanding of which would change everything? It's time to ask that question everywhere. In the pews of our houses of worship, in the halls of our lawmaking bodies, in the boardrooms of our global corporations, and the back rooms of our small businesses, in the town squares of our cities, in the dining rooms of our friends, and in the homes of our families. I'm going to invite you to memorize that question and ask it wherever you go, wherever good conversation and meaningful exchange and serious problem solving is taking place. Ask the question. Then, as the question hangs in the air, explain why the answer is obviously yes. We are a very young species. A lot of people like to think of humans as highly evolved. In fact, humanity just emerged from its infancy on this planet. In their book, New World, New Mind, Robert Ornstein and Paul Ehrlich placed this in perspective in one mind-boggling paragraph. Quote, suppose Earth's history were charted on a single year's calendar with midnight January 1 representing the origin of Earth and midnight December 31 representing the present. Then each day of Earth's year would represent 12 million years of actual history. On that scale, the first form of life, a simple bacterium, would arise sometime in February. More complex life forms, however, come much later. The first fish appear around November 20th. The dinosaurs arrive around December 10 and disappear on Christmas Day. The first of our ancestors, recognizable as humans, would not show up until the afternoon of December 31st. Homo sapiens, our species, would emerge at around 11:45 p.m. And all that has happened in recorded history would occur in the final minute of the year. Close quote. I consider that to be a brilliant piece of writing. In just 125 words, these two gentlemen have turned a huge piece of information into bite-sized data that we can get our head around and then more easily understand why we are continuing to act the way we do and have not yet, as a global species, made the daring decision. Our youth as a species doesn't justify our actions, but it helps us to see the nature of the challenge. We simply have to grow up. We have to stop acting like children. And we have to do it now, today, not in 10 or 20 years. Now, right now. We have to stop saber rattling The my missile is bigger than yours, flexing of military muscles between nations that could easily lead on a moment's notice to the deaths of hundreds of thousands and the decimation of nations. We have to stop the disaster ignoring, the kind of look the other way apathy that results in those statistics of billions suffering, even today on our planet, due to problems we could easily solve. We have to stop the hypocrisy, the kind of say one thing and do another behavior that allows us to deliberately kill people under the authority of the state in order to teach people that deliberately killing people is not okay. That allows us to place our children in front of video games and television programs and movies that depict violence and more violence, even as we talk of raising a generation that we hope will not think of violence as a first resort in conflict resolution and will, in fact, actually renounce it. We have to stop the kind of ignore what's good for us habits that allow us to consume unhealthy food, habitually inhale carcinogens, and irresponsibly drink harmful amounts of brain frying and liver damaging liquids, all the while preaching wholesome living. We have to stop the archaic thinking, the kind of stuck in yesteryear approach to life that keeps us trapped in an ancient story of civilization that motivates each of us to seek first to meet our individual needs, each of us to serve our individual agenda, and each of us to cater to our individual desires, even if it means doing so at the expense of others who we see as not a part of us. We have to stop, just stop, behaving the way we have been and call forth from within us a new way to be human, a way that allows us to embrace singularity without creating separation, to express differences without producing divisions, and to experience contrast without generating conflicts. All of this is possible, but it will require us to do something very brave. We will have to go against the grain, to adopt a way of life that only a handful have embraced throughout human history. We have to ask, when we confront and witness our own behaviors, what are we choosing? And why are we choosing this? And then we have to ask, why not choose God? And we have to understand what we mean when we invite ourselves to choose God. We have to be clear that the question we are asking is why not choose God to be experienced as a part of us and as that of which all beings and all aspects of life are comprised. The great irony is that the tiny handful who have taken this path, who have embraced this way of life, are the very humans we say we honor the most, even as we have declined to adopt their way of life ourselves. Or perhaps it is irrelevant. It is relevant to ourselves, we say, but it is virtually impossible for us to experience. This, despite the fact that those humans who have done so have told us exactly how we may also do so. Now, to be fair to humankind, we have certainly undertaken efforts to find an answer to our problems, many efforts. The difficulty is not that we haven't tried. The difficulty is how we've tried. There is no fault to be found in our intention. Their error lies in the manner in which we have made our attempts. End of chapter. So let's just go back to the beginning of this chapter for a second. Let me read the question, since everybody's gonna use this question this week, and we're gonna ask it whenever we can, okay? Is it possible, just possible, that there is something we don't fully understand about ourselves, about life, and yes, about God, the understanding of which change everything? That's the question.
sounds like it's asking us to find our blind spots, looking for what we don't understand. So sort of where the blind spots are. That's it.
And I think that question is timeless. No matter how advanced we think we are, or maybe that we are, but I think it's a timeless question. Over.
I think that all of Neil's books, the bottom line is, I read ahead to the next chapter. What he says is that all of this, which is illusion, is actually a spiritual problem and contrary to everything that we've read in the previous book. I mean, what God was doing through Neil was telling us that particularly the monotheistic religions, which are the most destructive, either they're fighting each other or a political thing or something. It's always othering. There's us and there's them. And the bottom line is that we are all God, every one of us. That's, I think, the answer to the question. Over.
What is that quote where that I can remember the second part of it, but not the first part, but and the enemy is us? Lindapedia?
I have met the enemy and it is us, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I think that plays a role here.
Let me do the meditation quick unless someone's got something to say.
No, go ahead, because we're at the top of the hour.
Lord God, the bottom line, the central question is simply this: how can we incorporate everyone in our heart, whether it's one heart or the hearts of every one of us here, Megs, Linda, Nanette, Bima, Angela, Sarah, Mary, and myself. We're here now reading this book, which is brand new, agreeing absolutely and completely that what we have here is a spiritual problem. It's not anything else. And because each one of us is just as powerful as God, there is no such thing as otherness. We are the enemy, but we're also the solution. Because when we combine our hearts in absolute faith that our prayer is already answered, then we're joining the millennials along with Greta from Sweden in saying, this is the end of the line. We're going to make our own hearts more loving, more generous, more inclusive. And we include Daryl and the starving children and the people who need clean water and toilets. Every one of us is in this together because we're all one. And we thank you already that our prayer, our meditation is granted as we hear this now. Amen. ready.
Okay, before we go, just so we, stick with the Lindapedia part. So the original quote is actually, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." And that was from a quote from 1812 in the Battle of Lake Erie. It was, what's the guy's name? Oliver Hazard Perry reported it to William Henry Harrison after the Battle of Lake Erie. It was Walter Kelly, the cartoonist of Pogo, the cartoon strip, that turned it into, "We have met the enemy and he is us."
Thank you.
So the original quote was "We have met the enemy and they are ours."
I was thinking of the latter of the two, the pogo
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's a very profound, the way what it turned into by Walter Kelly was very profound. And
I think cartoonists quite often are very profound.
yeah. And I think the profound thing about it is it's like, we can quit looking. Go look in the mirror.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
So before we go, I know we're supposed to post something on the 12th. Is there some place where I can find that? Where we were all post the same thing?
You will be able to either later today or by the morning in the US tomorrow. Hopefully it'll be later today so that people that are 7-8 hours ahead of us can see it. I'll work on it this afternoon. And we'll just, I'll put it on the Evolution Revolution page. And then I think, Shabana, you're the only one that is not on Facebook. So I will send it to you. Ann, do you have Facebook?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yes, I do have Facebook.
Okay.
Where do I need to go on it? As you can tell, I don't use computers a lot.
Yeah, no, it's the Evolution Revolution page that
Okay.
I'll have what we're supposed to be posting up tomorrow. And thank you, Angela. That will be really helpful. And until next Sunday. And good luck tomorrow.
Thank you, and keep getting better, Nanette.
Step by step, literally. But thank you for asking. Okay.
This is Megs. I was just wondering if we're not short enough, Ann could just read us. For those of us who don't really get on the computer much, Ann could just read us what she wrote.
It's not Ann, it's
Or came up with.
Angela. And Angela says it's not ready for the public consumption yet, but I will mail it to Linda if you can get it from Linda. Megs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Love you all.
Love you too.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.